Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. On this episode, I have a returning guest, Chuck Patton. Chuck, thank you so much for jumping in, joining. I know the last time we talked, we focused a good bit on comics, Justice League being one of those big titles that you've worked on. And I believe on this episode, we're switching gears to talk a little bit more about animation.
Yeah, yeah. Since that's where I ended up the last 30 something years.
Yeah,
Probably a good
absolutely.
idea to cover some of that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Anything new that's happening lately that you'd like to mention, including the shirt that you have on?
I would like let's say the good news before the bad. So the good news is I am wearing a this is not a custom shirt. You can get these at one of the leading and only horror bookstores in America. All horror all the time, called Dark Delicacies in Burbank. The proprietor is Del Hewison, also a horror author of note and a hell of a raconteur and an ex-Detroiter like myself.
Nice,
We
nice.
have a lot in common. Actually, his father was a Detroit police officer, and I think was also in the um, Coast Guard. One of my older brothers is the leading officers in the Coast Guard. So it's kind of like he and I hit it off before even knowing this, and realized, oh shit, we live in the same city. Grew up in the same city. Anyway, I
Nice,
love
nice.
Delicacies. I call it my happiest place in California. So if you're in Burbank and you're looking for scares or just looking for wonderful novelty books, they also have a large array of signings of authors as well as filmmakers and musicians in the horror genre, film genre, and book genre, of course, there. So that's enough. He owes me money now. So
That's right, that's right. Wow. Um, well, glad to hear that. Anything else that's new that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, it's a weird time in animation. This is one of the few times I remember ever being this. I hate to say dour, but it is a very dour thing when people have been laid off for more than 2 years, and the industry has. There is that on top of the industry going full guns on shows, with I would say very fragile direction or production values, money, as well as looking at AI to basically cut people out of their jobs. And
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of a scary thing for those in the business. And I'm pointing that out because most people don't realize just how much of a dire situation it is for people in animation. That's television as well, streaming as well as featured.
Yeah, yeah, definitely worth noting. And I know that about this time last summer, there were strikes going on about some
Yeah.
of the use of AI, but definitely a continuing issue.
Well, it's funny. It's like everyone thought, and I think the public persona was that why are these people bitching, moaning? They're making this amount, they're making that amount. But the truth was, you're not making as much as you think,
Hmm.
or they weren't making as much as you think, and there's a very few handful of people making that amount. And on the bottom line is again, the studios are looking for ways to cut them out. So this was for everybody. It wasn't just a small section of very exclusive people. Everybody suffered for that, but they fought for it. The sad thing is, and this is again public persona, is that after the strike, it seemed like you got concessions, things like everything's going to go back and be wonderful and robust, and it has not. It's
Yeah.
not about that. And that's the dourness of it. It's like, after all this fighting, what do you win?
Hmm.
And the dust hasn't settled as much as people like to think. Dust has not settled. Uh, I can't say there will be another strike, but it certainly isn't. Happy days are not here again,
Yeah.
as much as people want to believe it. So that's something in the business that I point out. I have a lot of young artists coming to me and say things like, how do I get in? How do I do that? And I'm back to where I have to say, you got to really think about this before you jump in this business. There's a certain amount of sacrifice. There's a certain amount of challenge you have to face that was not there 20 years ago, not there 30 years ago. And getting in seems easier, but when you realize what you're getting in with, you're getting no guarantee. And
Yeah.
again, like I said, there's only a handful of people who are actually making, let's say, being a success in this, but that success is even short lived. You don't know how long you're going to be there, and you don't know when you're going to be replaced. We also have other issues of ageism on
Mhm.
top of everything else, and that's not being addressed officially, but I hear it a lot, um, and have been a part of it myself. So it's one of those things where I tell a lot of young people not only think about this business, but also think about, you know, maybe other things in this business or maybe other businesses, something else to consider. Hard
Yeah.
thing to say when you want to come into this with all this great love, but the love isn't shown back.
Yeah. No, and it has to be reciprocated.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, speaking to the importance of animation, the importance of what you do and the creativity, I'm curious about what it was like to go from comics to animation and think about applying those skills.
It's funny looking at it now because I mean, in a lot of ways, I put in more time in animation than I did in comics. My love is still comics. It's like the long lost love I'll always have.
Hmm. Hmm.
But as far as what has made me, as we say, or as fans would say, made my flowers in this business has been animation, which is funny because it's to me it's a balance, but I think more people who would know animation know me at least by my rep, or at least the shows I've done. Getting into it was a whole lot different than it is now.
Hmm. Hmm.
I fell into it literally. I literally fell into it. I literally walked out of comics with the expectation that I was done there, that comics was done with me. I didn't feel done, but I felt it was done with me. And I had taken the realization of get away from the fan feelings, get away from this was a job I wanted all my life. I needed to make a living. I needed to pay bills. I needed to pay rent. I needed to find a way to stay in this genre or the genre of entertainment, to be a professional. And animation opened its doors again, a lot different than it is now. It was a lot more, the doors were open, you kind of drifted in, they gave you a spot. And my case was, I believe the first shows I worked on was for the early Marvel animation.
Hmm.
And Marvel, I went through a couple other. They haven't even decided they were really Marvel animation yet. They just used the name. But one of the first shows was Defenders of the Earth,
Oh yeah.
and yeah, which is funny making his comeback, and which cracks me up because I never thought it was that great an idea. I'm going to be very blunt on this interview.
By all means, by all means.
I did. I thought it was a loser concept then, even though I love the characters, at least some of the characters individually. I just thought it was a blatant, desperate attempt at trying to cross over. You
Hmm.
know, comic book fans weren't huge fans of these characters as much as they were, classic august characters. They weren't known among comic book fans, really. I mean,
Yeah.
and they predated DC and Marvel. But the joke is getting into animation. It wasn't like, ooh, this is snappy animation. It was pretty much, you know, really down and dirty, typical Saturday morning merch tie-in animation.
Right,
Which
right.
very bad. And I was in a emotional state where I didn't care. I was sort of like, okay, when I found out how much I was being paid to do work that I had to do three times as much in comics, and I was making twice the amount of money with, I thought, in my belief, in my training, was less effort.
Hmm.
I thought, okay, I'm just going to disappear you. This is better than me driving a cab. This is better than me going back home to Detroit and working at a factory. This is a factory, but it's not so bad. It's still creative.
Hmm.
And so I kind of had to I got to eat my cake and enjoy some of it too. Um, but what opened my eyes was really getting into the production of television. It finally dawned on me, wait a minute, you're in television. Look at these opportunities. Even though some of the product we're doing weren't great, I had to admire the amount of talent I was around. I was around a lot of classic guys, who were ex comic book guys who have drifted into the business for the same reason.
Yeah, yeah,
I say drift, but we all turned. Actually, animation needed us. Up to that point, a lot of action adventure animation has stopped in the, I would say, mid '70s, and basically because of politics, because most action adventure revolved around violence, and for some reason people kind of looked at that and thought, this is going to make my child into a homicidal maniac. So they
Right,
kind of
right.
pushed. There was all these decrees against you couldn't do this, you couldn't do that, couldn't do this. So it just watered animation down to something simplistic. You were lucky to have Peanuts, which was probably the classiest thing on television at the
Hmm.
time.
Hmm.
But all of a sudden, when it became syndication, when you got away from the usual network politicking, you got to do more freed up things. More, it wasn't like we went out and went crazy with violence, but you got to do. You had less, as we call standards and practices, hovering over your head, saying, oh my God, he jumped off a building. He shouldn't do that. He should have a parachute. Well, they came and said that anyway. But, but I mean, we still had to deal with them, but again, the venue was a lot more open, and it was still the Wild Wild West. So sometimes they didn't know what they were looking at,
Yeah.
and so these shows kind of blossomed, and a lot of very talented people. Again, I think if there was less talent involved, I would have felt more. Um, I think a lot more not as enthused to get involved, not as in, certainly not as excited. I wanted not to, but again, when you started, one of my first office mates was Mike Sikowski, who
Mm-hmm.
was before me, and this is after I drew Justice League. This was the premier artist of Justice League. He was one of the premier artists of DC, and then all of a sudden I'm in the office with him, and that was like finding the holy grail for me. I got to meet and work with someone who I admire since childhood, which
Yeah.
blew him away because he got into the business the same way I did, where it was like, I'm just going to make a check. I'm getting benefits. They'll leave me alone. I don't have to fight politics, da, 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 da. And all of a sudden, here's this fanboy going, oh my God, you're Mike Sikowski. And just having someone say his name that way, as opposed to, hey, Sikowski, draw a chair.
Uh-huh.
We're
Right.
both drawing chairs and guns and reminiscing, him telling me about the heydays of comics, the good and the bad, me sharing the nowadays of comics, the good and the bad, and finding kind of like again not only kindred spirits but looking around me and again realizing this is the schooling I needed all along to be around other artists. And as much as I love comics, it can be very solitary. And I was solitary. I was kind of cut off. And now all of a sudden, I'm in the California side of it, where a lot of these artists are falling into animation, and I'm in a bullpen situation.
Mhm.
And we're working on things that, you know, many times we'll work on things that we knew we could fix if they left us alone to fix it. It was toys, it was again merch, it was salespeople, it was all these guys making the calls, and all you had to do was just put your hands up and go, fine, I'll draw your chair. That used to
Right.
be the running joke with Mike and I. We're drawing chairs today, you know. Never mind, they're going to be sat on by Ming the Merciless, but still, it's a chair. So,
Right.
but, but that was, I think, in looking back at it now, that saved me as an artist. That I found these other artists, and I wasn't. I felt like I had fallen down, and not only on the job, but just my career. And then I'm seeing these other people have made these other choices, and it wasn't. They weren't ruined. They weren't destroyed. They were revitalized.
Yeah.
And may not have been working on things we wanted, but we were working. And that changed my perception of being an artist. It took me away from the fantasy of the artist and got me into the reality of what it meant to be an artist, which I think everybody who's the young ones coming up, as especially, should learn.
Yeah. Yeah. Uh, you also worked as a director, so I'm curious about how that the creative process kind of informed your role as a director.
Again, I say I've fallen into it, and in some cases, it would be here for hours, but I would just say that I worked my way from the bottom up.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't come in immediately as a director. I mean, even though I was a comic book artist, what blew the production people away is because as a comic artist, we drew everything. So in animation, everything is more specialist. You have a prop designer, you have a background designer, you have a colorist, you have this. Well, comic book artists sometimes had to wear all that.
Hmm.
And so a guy like me was much more valuable because they can stick me everywhere. And in the long run, learning that process, I started to climb up as responsibility was thrown at me. I got to be an art director. From art directing, it was funny. I went into art directing, then they took me from that into development.
Mm,
So
mm,
it was almost like simultaneous. And in development, I learned how to put a show together. I know how to sell a show. I saw what people were looking for when they wanted shows, how Bibles were made. Again, the nuts and bolts of things that I saw in comics are now on a larger, more expensive level in animation. And I got to see that behind the scenes and be a part of it. When your opinion started becoming, more an opinion started becoming an edict, that was kind of heady. And the thing about becoming a director, as much as I love movies and television and all that, and I soaked that in, I never saw myself in that role until my boss threw me into it.
mhm, mhm,
So all of a sudden, I had to make decisions, and that's why I tell anybody, you think you can do it, sit in the chair and try. It's a
mhm,
very frightening experience unless you have been trained. Again, what saved me was my inert ability to be a storyteller. I've always tell people, no matter, even now with my time in animation, I'm not an animator, I'm a storyteller.
mm,
And I just apply the rules of what my genre tells me, or my role tells me into that. I use that to steer who I am. And as a director, I was always about the story. I drove the writers crazy because I can combat them about the story. Because to me, I wasn't going to make a move until they were not going to write a script unless they understood the character. I knew that right.
mhm.
And if they didn't understand the character, I was going to browbeat them to hell until they did. And that was kind of okay. And that's when my boss went, you know what? You're a director. I know, because well, you fought off these guys and they kind of like starting to write the way you want them to. That's what a director kind of does. And he was a director, so he kind of mentored me that way. And then my editor taught me, I would say 98% more of what a director is by working with him in film. I made a lot of mistakes and he was there to point them out. We had to fix a lot of mistakes. That taught me a lot. Um, Depending on the budget. Never had a huge budget show, always had crappy budget shows. And I mean by crappy, but it was just enough to put it together, but not enough to make it a really finesse property.
Mhm,
Oh,
mhm.
and that taught me how to work fast, and also how to work economically, how to tell that story economically. It'd been great if we can throw big budgets on things, but I also found out that that was for me, that was a handicap. Not a handicap as much as it could give one a handicap. If
Yeah.
you can really fix this, if you had this amount of money with this kind of writing and this kind of art, you know, and hey, clock's ticking, we don't have that. But that doesn't mean I have to turn it out and make it shit. It actually kind of gives me more freedom to get creative.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
again, that's what kept me busy, being creative.
Yeah. Well, what is
Okay.
these days? What is
Yeah.
keeping you busy and creative?
Well, it's funny. It's like I started out this telling you about the business because it is important, and I don't want anyone to get starry-eyed going, "Oh, he's living the Hollywood life." Um, a lot of us, like myself, have been out of work for a long time, so I've had to. And part of being a director has been to reinvent yourself because
Mhm,
sometimes you be working in different genres. Sometimes you have to do a funny show. Sometimes you have to do an action adventure show. Sometimes you have to come back and do this serious thing. Sometimes something absurd. So, being I've had a lot of experience with that, um, long story short, reinventing myself, going back into what I love. I realized after all these years, I have stopped doing things that I loved.
yeah.
So, I've been going towards that. I'm less interested in trying to jump onto another show. I stopped that a long time ago. The last big show I was involved with was the revitalization of, I don't even know if we want to call it revitalization. Let's say that I was in charge of trying to get Boondocks off the ground
Mhm, mhm.
again. And that taught me a lot about some things may perhaps need to die, let it die. And also looked at it like, well, am I enjoying this? And I had to be honest and go, no, I'm not. Um,
Mhm.
I'm taking franchises and making them work. Maybe that's for someone who really has nothing to prove, or they have some more to prove. I knew for myself, I've done it enough. So it's now time for me to look for something I want to do. And the thing I haven't done was my own thing. So I've been in the process of developing my own IPs. Not IPs in general. Again, I've done that before. So what I'm looking at is something I can do that I enjoy for fun. Uh, Meaning I am developing a property and going to put my energy into that as opposed to, ooh, let's go off and revitalize X-Men. Oh, someone did that. That's right.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
and good for them. I bless them all. You know,
Yes, yes.
I would say wishing to the cornfield. Those who know me know what I mean by that. And I mean that, but that's all right. So I've been doing that, working on my own thing, and in the meantime, and going back and enjoying being an artist, which means I've been doing a lot of commissions. I've been taking on commissions, uh, almost like working out. You know, I'm going back to doing a lot of comic work, sometimes indie comic work, helping people get their things off the ground. I'm enjoying that. That's been fun. Again, I'm learning to draw for myself, which I've gave up. There was this long stretch where I did not even address my comic roots. My artists would find out I was the guy who drew the comic they grew up on and loved, and they would bug me about it. And I would sit there and go, oh, "We got a show, you know, I don't care.
Right.
We got a deadline." And then later sit there and go, "You know, I do miss that. I miss that association. I miss being able to. I can tell you what I was feeling when I was drawing these books. Often they get me to talk about it anyway.
Yeah.
And so later on, like I say now, where I am, and this is one of the few times I admit it, I'm officially retired.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
wouldn't say I'm fully retired for good. Never say never, but I know on paper I'm retired, and I'm using that time to find that love. So I've been going to conventions and doing convention shows, doing a lot of signings, again, commission work, enjoying the challenges I get in that. And also put it out there that I have been open to being a consultant on properties if people need me to be. I've had a couple of nibbles here and there, but it's all about having fun again because I spent so long working, I forgot that. I know some
Yeah.
guys like, oh, I love working. Oh, well, good for them. You know, I'm happy for them. You know, I am. I really am happy for them. I can't say that's for me. For me, I've worked so hard to get to this place where I thought, oh yeah, you know, why don't you draw this because you haven't had a chance to draw it. Now I can enjoy drawing
Yeah.
without feeling like I need to be doing something else.
Yeah, yeah, very well said, very well said, and glad to have you back anytime to talk about the project you're pursuing, and the IP that you're creating. Would you like to mention where folks can go for
Yeah,
commissions and any upcoming conventions?
absolutely. I actually missed the convention going on right now. I missed out on that, but I'm going out of state next month. My first out of state con in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Duke City Comic Con, I think it's called, or Duke Comic Con. It's on my Instagram and it's on my Facebook, and that's where you find me really primarily. I should throw in Twitter too, because I've been kind of active on that. I use Twitter completely devoid of politics as much
Hmm.
as I can and just look for the fun of stuff. I've met a lot of young artists there who inspire me and they claim I inspire them. It's a mutual thing. It's kind of great to see the amount of talent that comes up. And not only as a challenge, but also, again, encouragement. I see what they're doing and I see the kind of comics they're doing, which 30 years ago, I remember telling Dick Giordano telling me, well, we'll never have those kind of books again because everybody wants just superheroes. I wish Dick could see what's going on now.
Yeah,
There's that's fun out there. And that again is something that I thought, if I'm going to do this again, or if I'm going to use my whatever fame I have, I want to put it through that. So you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all under Chuck Patton Art.
fantastic, fantastic. Well, Chuck, a wonderful second talk. I always enjoy talking with you, and
Thank
it's
you.
an open invitation, so glad to have you back anytime.
I appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much.